That's karma.
number of people there, plagues and everything else. So it was a lot of fun, and it was just amazing that they could put that together in less than 5 days. And I appreciate all the people that came out and did that. Pandora, you want to talk about, Pandora's got some update on the CARP, and some real good information.
I still have my t-shirts from last meeting. I only have 3 left for Trump. So yeah, our good evening, Patriots. Our friend and colleague, Tim Froelich, was able to throw a bag that contained a coiled line in it that had enough weight on it. Tim's in the Coast Guard Auxiliary coxswain, threw that bag and got it to the lady's husband, who then handed it off to her, and then they were able to get that woman on board Tim's boat and take her to Calhoun's area. But the TWRA officer only had a regular line that wasn't in a bag like Tim's. He couldn't get it over there.
Oh,
So
wow.
Tim saved that lady, an older lady. I'm very proud of Tim.
Good deal.
Very proud. Okay, so Tim Burchett, our U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett, has just done something wonderful for us. And I didn't know one piece of this news that he has, but he is on Facebook in an interview with a very adorable looking blonde girl who's named Tara Backus, who's a professional actress in the area from Tennessee, and he is her surprise interviewer. Now, she did a Facebook video for Stop Silver Carp in Tennessee, and that video has now had over 500,000 views. She's very well informed on the Asian carp issue and very popular. We have people there who want her to run for governor, and I think that might not be a bad idea.
Yeah.
So this time her video included special guest, U.S. Congressman Tim Burchett. But you didn't know he was a special guest until a little into the video. It's had over 78,000 views. And so please go to Stop Silver Carp in TN, I-N-T-N, in Tennessee, or TN, and take a look at those videos there. So we are very grateful to him for that, for the fact that he was able to get $25 million from the Appropriations Committee for stopping the carp. Unfortunately, on the Senate side, they have been unable to pass any appropriations bills. 0 for 12 is what the Senate record is. The situation in the Senate is they need a 2/3 majority to approve one of those bills, whereas in the House it's a simple majority. So the Senate bill and the House bill have to get together and then in a conference get worked out to what the final amount is going to be and what have you. So with the Senate not doing their job, that's caused a problem. But for everything Tim Burchett was able to do, get bipartisan support for this bill, and get that $25 million through the House, and on top of that, be a freshman congressman, a new congressman, is fantastic. We really owe Tim Burchett a debt of gratitude. Now, in that video, which I hope you'll all watch, he mentions in there, he has spoken to President Trump about our problem with the Asian silver carp in the Oval Office. So Tim has carried that message as well as high as he can in the government, and hopefully we'll see some assistance. November the 8th, my group, the Wattsboro Ecology and Fishery Council, has got a Zoom meeting set up with the mayors from the impacted counties, Meigs, Ray, Rome, Loudoun, etc. The new head of the TWRA, Bobby Wilson, the Chief of Fisheries for TWRA, Frank Fiss, Alan Brown, who is from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, he's the Assistant Regional Director. So there's going to be a Zoom meeting now, and what we're trying to get from them is, what is their plan to stop the carp? They like to talk about how they try to control the carp, but you really can't control the carp. No one's been able to do that. So we are probing them for how much money do you have to help build a barrier. You know, we want money and we want answers basically in this meeting. So I did the people from TVA have been amazing, people that I've worked with. I want TVA to be the lead agency to stop the CARP because the CARP are using the TVA locks to get here. Okay? They use them like the New Yorkers use subways. So the TVA, however, doesn't have authority to control the fish. Okay, the fish belong to TWRA, Tennessee Wildlife, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. But I did find out the other day that TVA, TWRA, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife will be the three entities that make a decision about where barriers will be built on the Tennessee River in conjunction with TVA locks. So at least we have got that little smoke and mirrors problem figured out. And what's very good about that is TVA is extremely supportive of TWRA. So I think if TVA says we want one here, I think TWRA will try and make that happen as well. That's just my thought on it, but I do know they work very closely together on these matters. So anyway, if you can check out that Facebook Stop Silver Carp in TN and take a look at what Congressman Burchett says, I would greatly appreciate that. And if any of you want to help President Trump's campaign, I have our Second Amendment Loudoun County Sanctuary t-shirts here, $20. Your donation will be sent to President Trump's election campaign tomorrow morning. So thank you all. Thank you, Wayne.
Hey, Pandora.
Yes, sir.
You know the three entities, the TWRA, TVA, etc. Right? They can also be considered part of a bureaucracy. Do you think that they can actually sit down together and agree to something before the before the carp have babies and have babies and have babies again?
That's our problem. The TVA has initiated a $100,000 environmental study. They are studying all of their 10 locks and what would the environmental impact be with barriers in their river system. So that study won't be done until June 2021. Now I have the Senior Vice President of TVA, the gentleman that I speak with, says, Pandora, if you get me funding, I will supervise the barrier construction. He runs all those construction projects.
Who said that?
The Senior Vice President of TVA.
Okay, thank you.
He said, if you can get us the funding from Congress, from the state, I will oversee that. I mean, what he'll do is he'll hire contractors to have it built, but he will run the job. So they are kind of chomping at the bit to get going, and like I say, they initiated this very expensive environmental study. So, but we can't get anywhere until there's money. Till that study's done, and then there's money. What's worked in our favor this year is there's been so much rain that the carp have been moving downstream again to the Pickwick area. Okay, so that's worked in our favor. TVA is also looking at regulating the flows, because the eggs, if the carp lay eggs, if there is a slow or low flow of water, those eggs are only semi-buoyant, they'll sink and then die. So TVA is looking at a way where they can perhaps control the water flows so that these eggs, should there ever be a spawning situation, would actually kill the eggs if they could do it. So they are trying to look at it all different angles, but we are in a race against time.
Yes.
The Chickamauga incident where the fisherman started his trolling motor and had one jump in his boat was actually in November. TWRA didn't get the press release out until January, and that location was about 45 miles from Watts Bar Dam. That's breathing down our throats, right? Breathing down our necks. So anyway, we're doing everything we can, but I can't tell you that we're going to be in time, because it takes time to build barriers too and engineer them. But like I say, we're pedal to the metal. We're just trying.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pandora. You are doing a fantastic job of shepherding that and talking to the right people and pushing, and I know that you can push better than anybody I know. She's a pusher. Okay. I wonder how many military guys we have here are women. Very nice. That's great. How many of you know about the the Folds of Honor. Oh, good. Okay. That's something that occurs every once in a while. I'd like Jenny to come up here for a minute. We have a presentation to one of our members.
Beautiful.
Boy, wow.
Very
Wow.
nice.
Very good.
Yeah. And so this is something that's really neat. These ladies spent a lot of time doing this for the people that have served our country. I received one about a year ago, I guess, and I was flabbergasted. It was absolutely fantastic. And it's very special. They give it to veterans that have had some type of time in Vietnam or combat. So, Bob, will you please come up?
Me?
Yes, you. Bob was in Vietnam, Cam Ranh Bay. He was in the Army, and it was military police. And he spent a year over there. I'll tell you what, spending a year over in Cam Ranh Bay, you got rocketed probably once or twice a week. The food wasn't the greatest in the world. You did get to go out to the beach though and sun yourself if you wanted to.
Yeah, we had a big steak picnic.
Big steak picnics, he says, out there. It's it was quite a base out there. They had thousands and thousands of troops there. But it wasn't the safest place in the world, and if he was out on the front lines, the bad guys were shooting at him an awful lot out on the perimeter. And
I escorted convoys.
yeah, you escorted 40 convoys, which meant he had to go out to some of the Lima and Stoll sites and some of the special forces camps that were out there, bringing supplies and everything else to them. So that wasn't the safest place to be. And I want to congratulate Bob for making it through for 1 year. And you can get on one side, and your wife and your family is welcome to come up and take a picture with you also.
Mary Sanders is the one that... Yes, I want to take a minute to thank Mary Sanders. She
Yeah,
actually
Mary.
made this.
It's
Mary
beautiful.
Sanders made this for him.
Very nice.
Bob, you want to say anything?
Get your picture taken.
Thank you, Mary.
Well, you're welcome. Hey, it's an honor for me.
I appreciate it.
Beautiful.
Really do.
Can I take a picture? Can you take a picture with me?
Yes, she's...
Oh, yeah. You want me to go take a picture with you?
You want to stand on this side right here, Mary?
Yeah. This one.
Okay, I'll get it.
You stand right there.
I'll get another picture. Very good.
Yay, it's fantastic.
Very nice.
It's an honor to be escorted.
It's really an honor to get one of these. They don't give out very many of them because it takes a long time for these ladies to make these quilts. And each one of the quilts is made individually for the person. They look at what their experiences were, how they served, and then after that, then they decide what they're going to do for a quilt to make it special for that individual. So, Bob, thank you for your service.
Thank you.
pass around the basket. Thank you for any donation you might want to give. Go to our County Patriots website. And we're going to start off with our Constitution class now. Unless anybody has some comments, we're going to talk about the election and other things after the Constitution class towards the end of the meeting. So if you want to think about that, that would be great.
Questions?
Yeah, we'll start.
Looks like I'm preaching to the choir today. I guess it got out that I was speaking, so no one showed up. And I don't know how many people read it, but this past Sunday in the Knoxville News Sentinel, there was a front page article about the COVID mandates. The first line said, "The law is crystal clear. The Knox County Board of Health has the authority, the duty, in fact, under Tennessee law to control the spread of a pandemic disease like COVID-19. And my first thought was, really? Where'd you get that?
Yeah.
You know, and I've heard other experts, you know, when asked on television, are these mandates constitutional? They say, yes, of course. And that's all they say. I've never once heard anybody give any constitutional rationale why they are constitutional. They just say, yes, they're constitutional. Well, a month ago, I talked about the violations during this COVID situation of our federal Constitution. Today, I want to talk about our state Constitution. The main thrust of my argument a couple of weeks ago was, or a couple of months ago, was that our God-given rights can't be violated due to an emergency. Okay? Specifically, there are three basic freedoms guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment, which says, again, I quoted this last time, no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor shall private property be taken for public use without just compensation. Okay, it's readily apparent that our liberty and property have been taken without due process and without just compensation. Today, then, I want to focus on our state constitution during this panic. Actually, our Tennessee Constitution is a pretty amazing document. How many people have read it? Okay, if you haven't read it, you need to go read it. Hopefully after what I talk about today, it'll give you some incentive to go read it. It really is a great document, and it actually gives us more protection than the federal Constitution does. So let me first go back to the U.S. Constitution and talk about what the federal policy of the division between authority from the federal government and authority to the states. So, what does the 10th Amendment say, or say about the authority that the states have? Anybody remember what the 10th Amendment says?
To sum up, anything not delegated to the feds is retained by the states or the people.
Okay, to say it exactly as it's written, the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states, respectively, or to the people. So in other words, if it's not specifically listed as a power of the federal government, it's reserved to the states or to the people, period. Okay? And this amendment codified into the Constitution what the intent of the founders was initially when they talked about the limited powers of the federal government, those that were specifically enumerated. Hopefully you've heard that term, enumerated powers, before. But this put it into the Constitution exactly what that meant. And if you go back to Madison's statement in Federalist 45, he said the powers delegated by the proposed Constitution to the federal government are few and defined, and those which remain in the state governments are numerous and indefinite. So, basically, the state governments have numerous and indefinite powers, subject only to the limitations of the U.S. Constitution and their own constitutions. So what are the limitations to the states in the federal Constitution? What can't the states do that's specifically written in the federal Constitution? Well, I'll just read them. Most of them are in Article 1, Section 10. I'm just going to read them all, but you'll get a flavor for what they are as I read them. If you've read Article 1, Section 8, the powers of the federal government, you'll recognize a lot of this stuff. It says, no state shall enter into any treaty, alliance, or confederation, grant letters of marque or reprisal, coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts, pass any bill of attainder or ex post facto law, or law impairing the obligations of contracts, or grant any title of nobility. Then the next paragraph says, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any imposts or duties or on imports or exports, except what may be absolutely necessary for executing its inspection laws, and that net produce of all the duties and imposts laid by any state on imports or exports shall be for the use of the U.S. Treasury of the United States. And such laws shall be subject to the revision and control of Congress. And then the third paragraph says, no state shall, without the consent of Congress, lay any tonnage or any duty on tonnage, keep troops or ships of war in time of peace, enter in any agreement or compact with another state or with a foreign power, or engage in war unless actually invaded or in such imminent danger as will not admit of delay. Okay, so those are the main limitations on the state. So after hearing me read all that, what jumps out at you right away? Those are pretty much the exact powers of the federal government. So what they're saying is, okay, we've given these powers to the federal government, the states don't have power to do these things. But they can pretty much do everything else they want to do. So, there are actually a few other limitations. Anybody have any ideas what the other limitations might be? Of course, the states can't violate any of the God-given rights as articulated in the Bill of Rights.
Right.
Okay. I've already mentioned the Fifth Amendment, which talk about life, liberty, and property. Interestingly, and this is a subject for another time, when the Bill of Rights was initially written, most people agreed that that Bill of Rights only restricted the federal government and didn't necessarily put restrictions on state governments. Well, why would they think that? Well, if you look at the First Amendment, how does it start? Congress shall make no law, ... Okay? And then it starts listing, the First Amendment respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise. It talks about freedom of speech, freedom of press, etc. Oops. Well, that helped. So anyway, given that, a lot of people said, well, those are prohibitions on the federal government. They're not necessarily prohibitions on the state governments. Well, naturally, if that was the truth, the state governments would want to have their own prohibitions. So when you look at all the state constitutions, almost all of them have their own list of rights, and Tennessee's no exception. Okay, and I'll get into those here in a second. But the courts actually later on declared that the 14th Amendment incorporated all the other Bill of Rights into affecting the state, or having dominion on the states as well. So basically we have the Bill of Rights in our federal Constitution, which according to the courts, apply to all the states now, but all the states have their own Bill of Rights. So, again, that's kind of an interesting discussion for another day. Our Tennessee Constitution actually lists our rights first, and it's no exception. In fact, it has, in the very first article, it has a list of all our rights. And it's not just 8 or 10 of them, like in the federal Constitution. It's 36 different paragraphs on all our rights. And what it does is actually it repeats most of in fact, it repeats all the Bill of Rights in our federal Constitution, and actually adds more to them and adds more restrictions to the state government. On a historical note, our state constitution was first drafted in 1796, and Thomas Jefferson actually said that it was the least imperfect and the most Republican of all the state constitutions at the time. And if you read our state constitution today, most of what's written in it is from the original Constitution. In fact, there's been fairly few amendments made to it. There's been some over the years, but not that many. So it reads very much like the original Constitution did. So, back to the issue at hand. Government invoke emergency powers per the Tennessee Code 58-2, Section 107, called the Emergency Management Powers of the Governor. Now, this statute's somewhat vague. It kind of outlines vague powers and almost gives the governor dictatorial powers on what he can do in an emergency. Okay? Of course, that emergency is not, what constitutes an emergency is not defined. So, literally, the governor can say this is an emergency, no matter what. And then he's got all these powers. However, if you read that statute, it was really, the tenor of it, the design was obviously directed at things like tornadoes, earthquakes, hurricanes, etc. You know, a natural disaster area, a limited area with natural disaster, and it allows them to do certain things within that limited area. So, the governors use this statute to make various mandates such as business closures, stay-at-home orders, curfews, mask mandates, arbitrary essential worker proclamations, all of which restrict our liberty. This all begs the question, does the law violate our Tennessee Constitution? And I'll answer yes. And of course, if it does violate our state constitution, does the legislature have the authority to pass such a law? And does the governor have the authority to implement such a law if it violates our Constitution? No. Okay? And you know, that's kind of obvious, but our Tennessee Constitution actually states it very clearly, and I'll get to that here in a second. So let's look at what our Constitution actually says. And I'm going to read a lot of it, not a lot of it, but I'm going to read several sections of it. Again, it starts with a list of our rights and restrictions to the state in Article 1. Again, it mirrors our Bill of Rights significantly, but Section 2, Article 1, Section 2 says this, that government being instituted for the common benefit, the doctrine of non-resistance against arbitrary power and oppression is absurd, slavish, and destructive to the good and happiness of mankind.
Amen.
Okay, so right there, right off the bat, it you know, gives us a very important thing that sets the philosophy of government for our state. In other words, we as a people, or we as citizens of the state of Tennessee, should not bow to arbitrary power. In fact, it's our duty not to. It's written right there in the Constitution. It's our duty to resist tyranny. It goes on, Article 1, Section 8 states that no man shall be taken or imprisoned or disseised of his freehold, liberties, or privileges, or outlawed or exiled, or in any manner destroyed or deprived of life, liberty, or property, but by the judgment of his peers or the law of the land. Now, what does the law mean? Again, simple civics. Who makes a law? The legislature. So our General Assembly has to make a law. Okay? So it can only be instituted by an act of the General Assembly, per our Constitution. So all business closures, mass mandates, etc., stay-at-home orders, blah, 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 are in direct violation of this because they have not been enacted by law. Okay? First of all, the law they enacted is unconstitutional to the Tennessee Constitution, so it's not valid. And none of these mandates were actually enacted by law. Now I'll get into a little bit more of that. Other applicable restrictions in the COVID panic are Section 20, which says that no retrospective law or law impairing the obligations of contracts shall be made. This means that the government can't interfere with after the fact with citizens and business entities. In other words, do something that invalidates their contracts. Well, that has certainly been done with business closures, etc. That, you know, people's businesses closed down, they can't pay their rent. They're invalidating a contract by doing that. They can't meet their obligations. Again, Section 20 doesn't allow that. Also, Section 21 says that no man's particular service shall be demanded or property taken or applied to public use without the consent of his representatives or without just compensation being made therefor. Okay, if just compensation and consent of our representatives have been made for business closures and all the other mandates that are coming out? No, not at all. Okay, again, that's another one. These business closures and curfews have effectively taken people's private property for the quote public health without just compensation. Although not entirely applicable, Section 25 talks about martial law. This is what it says. That martial law, in the sense of unrestricted power of the military officers, or others to dispose of the persons, liberties, or properties of the citizens is inconsistent with the principles of free government and is not confided to any department of the government of the state. In other words, martial law, you know, is normally military rule, but they're kind of expanding and saying by the military or others, and it's not confided in any of the three branches. No one can do it, basically. I don't care who you are. I don't care if you're the governor, mayor, whatever. And if you think about it, what's been going on is in essence martial law. It's just arbitrary rule by one person or one little group saying you have to do this, you can't do that. Yeah.
Okay, but you previously had said that the governor is given certain rights when it's an emergency.
Okay, that was by that law, not by the Constitution. I'll get to that in a second.
Okay.
Okay. The summation of all these rights is in Article 11, Section 16, and it says, the Declaration of Rights hereto prefixed is declared to be a part of the Constitution of the state and shall never be violated on any pretense whatsoever. And to guard against transgression of the high powers we have delegated, we declare that everything in the Bill of Rights contained is accepted out of the general powers of the government and shall forever remain inviolate. So basically, if a right is listed in our Bill of Rights, for Section 1, nobody in the government can violate that, period. And that means the legislature, executive, or judicial. none of those branches have authority to violate those rights, period. So, looking at these rights, the Tennessee Constitution does allow the legislature to make such laws that would mandate business closures, but not without just compensation to the affected businesses that have been taken for the public health. Now the question is, can the legislature delegate their lawmaking powers to the governor? This is in essence this is what they have done by passing that law, the emergency powers of the governor. They've in essence delegated their powers. Again, going back to that statute 58-2-107A2, emergency management powers of the government, it states, the governor may issue executive orders, proclamations, and rules, and may amend and rescind them. Such executive orders, proclamations, and rules have the force and effect of law. Okay? To me, this is an obvious violation of the Tennessee Constitution, as Article 2 gives only the legislature the power to make laws in the state of Tennessee. Additionally, Article 3 gives no lawmaking power to the executive department. As it states in Section 10, the governor has only the power to take care that the laws be faithfully executed. To further emphasize the point, in Article 2, Section 2 states, no person or persons belonging to one of these departments, referring to the legislature, executive, judicial, shall exercise any of the powers properly belonging to any of the others. So in other words, the Constitution is very clear that the executive, the governor, can't do the job of the legislature, and vice versa or whatever. So, knowing that, is it lawful for the legislature, for the General Assembly, to pass a law that allows that? And my answer would be no. You can't do that. You've delegated unlawfully your authority to do that. Now, so since the governor doesn't have the authority to make law, can he use this law to delegate to lower powers of the executive or other agencies? Like he's done. You know, he's given unelected health boards the power to make rules. Again, if the governor doesn't have the power, he doesn't have the power to delegate. It's pretty simple. Again, to emphasize the Constitution again, well, did I can't remember, did I say this? Now let's go back here. Lost my spot.
Ray, is anybody legislating any of this? Is anybody challenging?
I'll get to that at the end. Did I read this? The governor is authorized to delegate such powers as the governor may deem prudent. That's in that law. Again, he's been doing that. He's been delegating his powers. But again, if he doesn't have the power himself, he doesn't have the power to delegate. Again, this is a violation of Tennessee Constitution. Article 7, Section 1 states, the qualified voters of each county shall elect for terms of 4 years a legislative body, a county executive, a sheriff, a trustee, a registrar, a county clerk, and an assessor of property. Their qualifications and duties shall be prescribed by the General Assembly. Okay? Therefore, the governor has no constitutional authority to delegate powers to county mayors, and especially unelected health departments, because they have not been given those powers or those responsibilities by the General Assembly. Again, it has to be done by law. Of course, there are many in our government who applaud the unconstitutional actions of the governor. In July, Tennessee Attorney General Herbert Slattery issued an opinion on the constitutionality of orders to wear masks, the mask orders in the state of Tennessee. He found such orders justifiable on and this is the only time I've heard any rationale, justifiable on the Jacobson test, which Jacobson versus Massachusetts was a 1905 Supreme Court case that upheld the police powers of the state to mandate a smallpox vaccine, okay? However, this mandate was passed by an act of the Massachusetts legislature.
Right.
Okay? Now, whether you agree with that Supreme Court ruling or not, this was clearly a different situation. You know, if our General Assembly had passed such a law, then we'd have to kind of kneel and buckle. But they haven't. This is an executive mandate, executive fiat, totally different from a law passed by the General Assembly. So that Jacobson test really has no precedent and doesn't work at all in this situation. Now, it's time our voices are heard and we demand a stop to these unconstitutional edicts. There's a group called Tennessee Stands. Anybody heard of them? And I got a lot of my information from them, so I'm kind of plagiarizing a little bit. I don't think they'll mind. I urge you to go to their website and look them up. Look at their petition that they're sending the governor. I think they're actually doing a lawsuit against the governor and against this law itself, trying to get it overturned. TennesseeStands.org, all strung out. TennesseeStands.org is their website. You know, if we all stand together in this, something's gonna get done. There's actually been an ad hoc committee of our General Assembly that is looking into this and been hearing testimony from lawyers and guys like Tennessee Stands, things like that, you know, about the unconstitutionality of all this stuff. And hopefully our General Assembly will, at the very minimum, revise that law and, you know, and put a lot more restrictions on the governor and on the other executive agencies during their next session. And I would like to see it repealed because, you know, to me it just flat violates. I guess you don't have to totally repeal it. You can just box them in so much that they can't get away with the stuff they've done. So that kind of ends the Constitution part of it, but since we have some time, I wanted to just talk about the whole COVID hoax, is what I call it.
Can we go back to the Constitution? Did you hear, let me turn this on so I can...
Did you hear that a federal judge in Pennsylvania said that it was unconstitutional for them to shut down businesses and do all the things that the governor has done? And that...
Well, that's great. I haven't heard that.
Yeah, it just came out. It just was on the news.
Was that today?
That was today.
Okay, I didn't hear that today.
Yeah, and so...
I was watching my grandkids. I didn't have time.
That's okay. But it wasn't very much about it, other than that the state's going to appeal to, you know.
Well, of course, you won't hear it on major media, but you probably found it on a conservative website.
Right. It was actually on Fox News that came over.
Glenn Beck, too.
Say again?
Glenn Beck.
Glenn Beck? Yeah, that's right. It was Glenn Beck. It's the one that...
And the reality is that if I owned a business, I'd be suing. And I would encourage everyone that has a business that was shut down to sue.
Yes.
Because the more people that are doing, the more people get behind it. You know, even if the liberal courts overturn it, it's going to prove the point that, hey, we're not going to stand for this. So we need to be doing something. We just don't need to back off and bow down.
Yeah, it has to go to a 3-judge panel so that they can have a stay of this judge's order. And they're hoping it's going to go to the Supreme Court, to where the Supreme Court will say that it's unconstitutional to shut down businesses and all that stuff. If that ever happens, then what you're saying about all this stuff is null and void. They can't do it.
Yeah.
That would be neat.
Well, and as we all know, it is unconstitutional. Unfortunately, the courts don't actually side with us all that often. But we'll see. That would be great. That'd be great if they did.
Okay. So I'll let you go on with your...
Okay. Yeah, I just want to talk about what I would call this whole hoax of the COVID panic. and you notice I've been calling it a panic, not a pandemic. Because I think it's just, there's so many inconsistencies and outright falsehoods that we've been told, that I really believe this whole panic has been fabricated with this specific intent just to hurt our country and to promote a leftist agenda, and probably number one, to help the Democrats elect their guy instead of Trump. So I'm just going to list a couple things, and there's probably, I know there's a whole lot more, but these are just some total inconsistencies about the whole deal that I want to bring up. You probably all heard most of them. First of all, it was just one member of the WHO who called it a pandemic to start with. And of course, we all know that the World Health Organization is not the most conservative organization in the world. They're pretty leftist in philosophy. But so this one guy says it's a pandemic, and who knows whether he's really qualified or not, and who knows what ulterior motive he had. At the very least, he was just trying to cover his rear, and do something. So, but of course, everyone immediately jumped on the bandwagon. Oh, this is a pandemic. This is terrible. We need to do something. Of course, most of the state governors' responses have been more like, "We need to do something, so let's do this." It's not really thought. It had never been thought out that much. No thorough analysis of the whole issue. Mask mandates do not work, period. Dr. Fauci, which everybody listens to, said early on that masks don't work. He's changed his mind now. But let's look at the facts, okay? On April 3rd, the OSHA issued guidance for respiratory protection for workers exposed to people with the virus. And it stated clearly, surgical masks and eye protection, i.e. face shields and goggles, were provided as an interim measure to protect against splashes and large droplets. And they put a note, surgical masks are not respirators, and they do not provide protection against aerosol generating procedures. Okay. In other words, masks might help if you're sitting there coughing and hacking, but otherwise it's not going to help. And the masks they were talking about were surgical masks, the best ones out there. Masks worn by people in a hospital for a short amount of time. So let's see all the other issues. First of all, the coronavirus is roughly 100 nanometers, 1/1000th the width of a hair, and 1/30th the size of a surgical mask filtration. And surgical masks, not to mention cloth ones, obviously don't help. I've heard the analogy that it's like trying to catch a mosquito with a chain link fence. Okay? You just can't do it. It's not going to happen because the virus is 1/30th the size of the smallest hole in a mask. And those are the best of masks. And this would explain why experience has shown that everywhere where there's universal mask orders, countries like Japan and other Far Eastern countries, they have mask orders that everybody has to wear them. Well, it's been shown that it has absolutely no effect. It hasn't stopped it. It hasn't slowed it down. There's virtually no data showing any better for those who wear masks, across the board in those areas. The CDC, as late as May, produced data that showed no significant reduction in influenza transmissions with the use of face masks. Other reports showed the same results, and there's probably tons of them on the internet. If they haven't been taken down, the big what's it called, YouTube? They've been taking down videos of doctors trying to explain all this stuff, and they just take them down. On March 8th. Way back when it started, Dr. Fauci asserted on 60 Minutes, there's no reason to be walking around with a mask. He went on to explain that masks can only block the large droplets, like I just said. They give a false sense of security, and they cause people to get more germs in their hands by fiddling with it. And several weeks later, the Surgeon General, Jerome Adams, said that based on a study that shows medical students who wear masks touch their face 23 times more when they have a mask on than without. Okay? And guess what happens when you're touching your face? Okay, you're transmitting disease. And they went on to say, one can assume that wearing a mask improperly can actually increase your risk of getting a disease. There have been other studies that show that wearing masks actually contribute to other health issues because of trapped bacteria in the mask during prolonged use. Okay, again, it's not like a hospital where they wear it a little bit and throw it away. Like, you know, guys, everybody's wearing a mask. You're keeping it on. You know, these waitresses keeping it on all day long. So they're breathing in, breathing out, and their bacteria is building up inside the mask. Okay, those facts don't change with time, but politics do. Okay, so why does Dr. Fauci recommend masks now? Well, I forget, I heard him say this, I forget how long it was, but he said, it's psychological. People feel better if they're wearing a mask. Therefore, we all should wear a mask. He actually said that. I heard him.
I know.
He's a doctor.
Okay, the real answer is that he's bowing to the wants of the left who basically just want absolute power over us. Okay, it's been shown statistically that the deaths attributed to COVID are those who are the most vulnerable positions of health and age and significant medical issues. In other words, you know, if you're old, in a nursing home, you got all kinds of other issues you're dealing with, you catch COVID, you're probably going to die. And that's what the vast majority of the people, the deaths in the United States have been exactly that. The cases that have, you know, no other health issues are just so rare. What do you say, Fred? 10,000 in the whole United States? Something like that?
6%.
The data shows that death rates are no worse than those same groups of people being exposed to the flu. But do we hear about flu deaths in the media? Absolutely not.
You know, Ray, used to be when old folks would die of the flu, they would just list it as, you know, that they finally succumb to old age.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, because the flu can be, you know, for an old person, the final comorbidity on top of all the other, you know, things
Hey,
that.
watch it with that old people.
I didn't say that in a derogatory sense. We're all going to die one day. If you want to talk to me about that, I'll tell you about Jesus, okay?
Well, also the number of COVID cases have been greatly exaggerated. You know, we've all heard anecdotal stories about all the false positives you get. A recent article in the New York Times, which is by no means a conservative newspaper, stated that the testing for COVID was way too sensitive and suggested that anywhere from 40 to 90% of all positive tests could be false or non-contagious. Have you heard that repeated in the major media?
I heard that they get a certain amount of money for every COVID death. That the hospitals and doctors are being paid money for the COVID deaths.
That's my next point. Okay, thanks. Thanks for that intro. Yeah, of course you don't hear about these things in the news. What you do hear about is the deaths, but the number of cases and deaths by COVID have been greatly exaggerated. A senator and doctor, Scott Jensen, explained that Medicare has determined that if you have COVID-19 admission to the hospital will get $13,000. And if that COVID patient goes on a ventilator, they'll get $39,000. And California hospitals have been getting $50,000 from the government for each COVID-related death. Okay? As a result, any death these days is likely to be listed as COVID-related because of the financial incentive to the hospitals.
They would want them to recover either.
Yeah. My wife actually has a friend of a friend whose husband died of a heart attack. And they listed on his death certificate, COVID-related. Okay. Now, you know, that's just one anecdotal story. You've probably heard others, but it doesn't necessarily prove widespread abuses, but as it's commonly said, follow the money. Follow the money and you get the real story, right? Okay, just the other day, Biden claimed that almost 119 military members have contacted COVID, and there have been 6,114 deaths to the military members due to COVID. Well, if you looked at DoD stats, 58,000 have tested positive, and there's been only 7 deaths.
Right.
7, not 6,000 plus. Okay, this is just typical of the outright lies and misinformation from the left and their media accomplices. We hear every day the number of positive cases that shot up, especially on UT campus. You're hearing it every day on the news, right? First, guess what? If you do more testing, and by the way, we're doing like five times more than 5 times more testing, the number of positives is going to go up, right? That's just natural. Secondly, how many times have you ever heard on all this media, oh, so many more students at UT have tested positive for COVID? How many times have you ever said how many of them are actually sick?
Every time. That's always my question. Every headline is there's a new cluster.
Yeah, but how many of them are sick?
How many of them actually are symptomatic?
And I've talked to UT students and they said, well, you know, like at the sororities they're talking about how bad it is. It's like, well, yeah, one of the sorority sisters had a little headache and, you know, maybe felt like a cold for a day or two, but she was fine. And that was the worst of the worst, you know? And so they're blowing all this out of proportion because everybody tested positive. And again, if you go back, well, if there's 90%
I don't think
positives,
there's been any deaths of the students that I know of.
I don't think so either. I haven't heard of it. Of course, that'd be headline news if someone died.
Oh, one is all they need.
Yeah. All right, where was I? UT, yeah. Again, what's the big deal if you test positive but you're not sick? The science behind this so-called social distancing is very weak at best. You know, they say 6-foot social distancing, and everybody's jumped on the bandwagon. Okay. Well, first of all, the WHO says 3 feet works fine. So why are we doing 6? And by the way, that term social distancing was actually made up by a high schooler several years ago. And everybody's just jumped on the bandwagon and said, oh, that's a good sounding term. Let's use that. Social distancing. That's great. Now, although COVID can be as serious as the flu, there's one way that it's not like the flu at all. If you have the flu, you will have symptoms. You'll feel terrible.
Right.
I mean, everybody that's had it, you know what the flu's like. You feel terrible. If you have the flu and you kiss your wife, she's going to get the flu and she's going to have symptoms. It's transmitted that way. Not so with COVID. If you test positive, again, how many of these tests are not accurate anyway, but you may or may not have symptoms. If you kiss your wife, she may or may not even test positive. So it's totally different from the flu. You know, I was going to tell a COVID joke, but 98% of you wouldn't get it.
Gotta tell it now.
It's a 98.4 out there. Big question is, have all the lockdowns and other draconian measures worked? Is there any evidence at all that it has? Why are we ruining our country for questionable results? And that's the bottom line.
Hey, Ray,
Yeah.
who was the guy, I believe it was in California, who said, oh, just as soon as the election is over, all the kids are going to go back to school?
It's
Yeah.
a she, and it's the
Was that she?
public health director of LA County.
Yeah, I've heard that. Again, that just points to the fact that it's totally political.
They just caught it, they caught her on a hot
Including
night.
the mayor of DC.
Yeah, they caught her on a hot night.
All of this is political.
Yeah.
Well, actually, you know, there was a mass retirement of public
Just a
health
minute.
directors when this,
Yeah, nobody can hear you on the other end.
that's okay. There was a mass retirement of public health directors when these things started rolling out because they disagreed with them and they couldn't in good conscience. implement these draconian measures. So rather than, you know, bucking up against their elected officials who are demanding action, they just said, forget it, retire and, you know, or go somewhere where they could actually function. But it's interesting because I float test balloons out on social media. It was probably a month ago when I started posting some of these, I don't think this is real. I don't think, you know, this is really happening. I think these numbers are inflated, blah, blah, blah. And to a person, including Republicans coming out of California, jumped all over me. Mary Jane, wear your mask, do this, do that. And it was like they were just having a complete meltdown because they're so brainwashed, because they have been shut down for so long. The same thing is happening in New York City. De Blasio has the perfect storm right now because he has the riots and COVID, where, you know, you saw the letter from the CEOs. I can tell you their directors of real estate, who are my friends, are not returning to the city, and they're looking at alternatives. Just like they did in the 60s and the 70s with race riots, they're going to leave New York City and all these major metropolitan areas, and it's just heartbreaking. And, you know, what is it, 1,000 people a day are moving to Florida? That's a $30,000 migration monthly. So that's a little town, right? If you think about 30,000 people around.
Of course, the less mantra in all of this is, if it only saves one life, it's worth it. Okay? Really? Okay. Well, if that's the case, let's outlaw cars. Look how many people we could save from traffic accidents. Or let's, well, yeah, I mean, obviously that's a big one. You know, let's outlaw swimming pools. You know, someone might drown. You know, I mean, again, you get the point is there are a million things out there that could kill us, but we don't stop life because of some small, you know, percentage of danger that we might be in.
Last week, the CDC numbers indicated 170-something thousand coronavirus deaths. 1.4 million people died in America.
Well, and that's the other thing I wanted to get to. All the unintended consequences of these government mandates, stay-at-home orders, business closures, etc. Many people are not getting regular hospital treatments, okay? Like cancer screenings or chemotherapy or colonoscopies or on and on, because they're just afraid to go to the hospital because of all the, you know, the negative publicity out there. Oh, I'm going to catch it, I'm going to die kind of thing. So they're not getting the regular stuff that they should be. How many people are dying from that? There's even, you know, been noted that people with serious things like a stroke aren't going to the emergency room because they're afraid they're going to catch the COVID and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so people are not getting the treatment they need. And I'm sure there's been a bunch of deaths due to that. Of course, they never talk about it.
They're COVID-related deaths.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Okay, child abuse cases in emergency rooms have gone up 35% since the lockdowns. Okay, these aren't just, you know, bruises and stuff to the kids. These are serious cases where the parents bring them in, they think they've actually close to killed their child. Okay, and they bring them into the emergency room. Those are up 35%. Of course, obviously the stress of the lockdowns, unemployment, the kids at home when they should be at school, you know, one on top of the other is causing all this stuff. How many more suicides do we have as a result of all these fear tactics? How many more drug overdoses? How much more alcoholism? I mean, it goes on and on and on. The left never looks at the big picture when they do these things. The left is also, obviously, you've heard about it, using this panic to interfere with state election laws in the hopes of defeating President Trump. The courts have used the panic as an excuse to demand that states accept write-in ballots just because people are afraid to go to the polls. Okay? These rulings violate, obviously, state election laws, specifically our Tennessee state laws, about absentee ballots. And what constitutional justification do these judges use? None. It's just, their simple reasoning is they don't like it and it's not fair. Okay?
That's what Kamala Harris says.
didn't agree with something, so she didn't defend Prop 8 with the California Supreme Court because she disagreed with it.
Yeah, exactly. It has nothing to do with the legality of it or constitutionality of it. Of course, it's common sense that write-in ballots make voter fraud a whole lot easier. We've already seen it, what Georgia reported last week. You know, they had, I forget how many cases, but to me, that's kind of the tip of the iceberg.
Hey, Ray.
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a contested election.
Yeah.
66% of Republicans are going to vote in person. 85% of the Democrats are going to mail in their ballots.
And vote in person.
Very good.
And their dog's gonna vote.
So in the year 2000, when that happened, the S&P 500 went down about 5% until the Supreme Court decided who won that election. So tell us what's going to happen this time around based on the fact that these ballots are going to be rolling in. They're going to be hard to count. I mean, I tried to count money one night at the NRA, at the annual meetings, for people that had come in the door and paid to get into the annual meetings. Because my friend said to me, help me count money tonight. And I, like a fool, said, sure, I'll count money with you. I counted money all night long. How are they possibly going to get these ballots counted in any time frame at all where this election can be determined, you know, in 6 months, 3 months, whatever?
Well, it's not quite as bad as that, especially in the state of Tennessee. I've got a friend that works for the election commission in the vote thing, and it's all computerized. So when they do an absentee ballot in this state, they mark it in the computer, and if someone shows up to vote, it'll show up say you've already voted absentee, and you can't vote. So computers obviously make it a little bit easier. Now, what's going to happen if, you know, when everything's contested, you know, it's not really the job of the courts. You know, the Constitution says it's, you know, if there's no, it outlines what to do if no one gets a majority or there's some dispute, and it's Congress that's supposed to deal with that, not the courts. Anyway, hopefully that's
only temporary.
yeah. Again, I don't have a good answer. I wish I did. Yeah.
I don't have a question. My dad's pecking on my shoulder, telling me to speak up. So, just to tell you, I am in education. I am a teacher and dean of a middle school and high school. I've been in education for 24 years. And our school, I work at a private school, so we are not under public education laws or funding or anything like that. We were sent home in March of last year with the rest of the state, and we did distance learning for 2.5 months. We only lost 3 days of school before our teachers pulled together and got together a distance learning program. And so 3 days of school we didn't have, and we went through the end of May. So our school this year, we have 400 students and we have 100 staff and faculty. We are mask-free. We do not social distance. So we have 500 people in the building every single day. We started school on time this year, and we are in our 6th week of education, and we have not had one COVID case. 500 people. We do not social distance and we do not wear masks. What we have seen and what I wanted to share with you guys is that we have doubled our enrollment since last year because our county, I live in Hamlin County in Morristown, and it's a small town, but they just started school last week, and we've been in school for 6 weeks. We have gained 200 new students since we started August 10th. And our county is very upset. Our parents are very upset about education. But I just wanted to talk about what I've seen in the classroom, because the students in this nation most of them did not do distance learning, or they failed at it, the school system failed at it, or it's very hard for even educated students to stay at home and stay on a computer for hours. I know that that's what UT is going through. But the 200 students that we have added, I'm also chair of the math department and I teach math. What we have seen in the 200 students that we have new to our school this year, because we're Math Plus and because we are doing education, is that these students have lost 6 months of education. And 6 months of education lost where they have done nothing feels like in the classroom with students that didn't stop education is that there are years of a gap when you come in and you haven't done education for 6 months. And I just wanted to say that our school is very concerned about our nation because we will be graduating students that are the lowest educated that I've ever seen in my 24 years of education. And these effects in education in our students, yes, the suicide rate is up and that's horrible, but we will see these effects in education, students not being educated for years.
Well, I applaud your school
Thank you very much.
I applaud your school for doing that, and my hope is that parents out there will see what a failure public schools are, and start sending their kids to private schools or homeschool or whatever else.
Got another question.
Yeah.
Ray, back to counting the ballot. Let's assuming the ballots actually get there. If they do this mail-in thing, my mail carrier would know who the Republicans are.
Yeah.
He would have seen all my Trump mail.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, my neighborhood is mostly, conservative, so what, you're
Well, again,
trusting.
that's to me, that's the whole, there's so many issues with mail-in votes that, it's just, there's so many ways for voter fraud that, it's going to be a disaster. And like you said, what's to prevent a guy from just dumping them into the trash?
Yeah.
Not getting them. And then you're going to have the whole issue of, well, was my vote counted? I don't know if you could actually go and find out, did my vote get there or not? I think you probably could.
You can. You can go to the election, and if you have a ballot that was absentee and didn't get there, you can vote. What do they call it? Provisional ballot, in case that your ballot never makes it. Then you can use that. So you could do a provisional ballot.
That's after the election.
No, you can do it on election day.
And it's
Do a provisional ballot.
Yeah. But how many people are going to do that?
Not very many, if you voted by mail. I also asked a question about the electoral college. When does the electoral college have to vote or is supposed to vote for the president? There is a date, and that is in November. About the middle of November is mandated by Congress that the electoral college has to determine who the president is. So that should be a date. But we talked about that, and may or may not be changed by Congress.
Yeah, Congress has the authority to set that date, so they can change it, obviously.
They can change it, but right now it's in the legislation.
But the swearing date is firm though, right?
Swearing date's firm.
Theoretically.
Right.
Right. Be a nice kind of set.
So we're in theory land.
Back in the day, Lincoln got sworn in I think late March or early April. So it's changed over the years.
Sure.
It's not in concrete in the Constitution.
Well, if Biden gets in, I'm going to vote to defund the Secret Service.
Everybody hear that? If Biden gets in, she wants to vote to defund the Secret Service.
Okay, back to COVID real quick. Let me wrap up. I'm not saying that it's not a serious health concern. Of course it is. Those who are at high risk need to take precautions. Elderly, people have other health issues, etc. But Why are we treating it like it's the Black Plague? You know, we don't shut down our economy every flu season. It's no worse than the flu. Why are we doing it? Basically, we've turned our society into a horror show where everyone is wearing a mask everywhere. Even, you know, you see people driving in their car by themselves wearing a mask. It's like, go figure. We have COVID Nazis who'll tell me to put my mask on because I'm endangering their life. You know, it's like, I personally refuse to wear a mask. I don't. And I go into stores, and the reaction I get from most stores, the people look at me and say, I wish I could take my mask off. That's what I see in their eyes.
They have computer robots now that they're selling to places that will tell you to put your mask on.
Oh, no.
Well, you know what I do when I get a computer robocall? Hang up. Well, we have health departments who have no authority imposing curfews and business closures. We have government taking away livelihood of small businesses. Many of them will close and never open again. So really, we're being set up. We are being set up. We are, you know, like sheep going to the slaughter. We're bowing to the leftist agenda. And what's going to be the next crisis? You know, what's the next crisis where they say, oh, you have to do this or you have to do that? If we don't take a stand now, we're done for. Where's the Patriots today that said, like Patrick Henry, give me liberty or give me death? You know, we need to be like that. It's like our liberties are being trampled. We need to stand up against them. So, comments, questions, any more comments?
I have only one comment. The impeachment was very dry before this COVID hit, and is by the World Health Organization, and I believe it's all a hoax.
I wonder who's making money from masks.
That's true. China. Today in a podcast we were listening to, they found a video of Biden talking in October about a pandemic and the nation not being prepared. So what did he know?
John? As a comment, if you take a look at the overall situation of COVID, we are marching towards socialism. One of the key factors of socialism is control. If you cannot have a central government that is strong and can enforce their will upon the people, it'll never fly. If in fact you cannot control your people, it will not fly. Stop and consider the fact how many good-natured, good people we have in this country who have voluntarily put their hand up and said, I'll wear a mask, I'll stay 6 feet away from you. If that's what you told me to do, that's what I'll do. Somebody smiled and said, gotcha. The longer this goes on, the more graft and corruption will come out. You spoke well of it, of the number of dollars being going out. I maintain that as soon as he run on a mask, this will be over with, but that's besides the point. But stop and consider how you are being controlled. Now, if it's a decision that you have thought through, that's one thing. But if you're doing it just simply because of the fact that everybody's doing it, then you're being controlled.
Good summation. Yes.
Any other comments?
I guess I'm a conspirator theory here, but think about how our country's been disrupted by a really bad flu. If the Chinese watched all this happen and saw how our country reacted and how badly we reacted to the damage we took. What happens if they give us something that's really bad, you know? And they're watching it. They're not stupid. They are some smart little bastards out there. And if we don't think ahead about this and we don't contact our representatives and tell them, you know, start thinking about the country and the people, the Chiefs will do it again, and then we won't have a chance. It'll be too late.
It's pretty much been proven that the virus was man-made and it started in China.
I have to tell you this, and I haven't told you yet. I went to the grocery store this afternoon.
By yourself?
Needless to say,
You get any groceries?
I didn't wear a mask when I walked in, Dingles. And I never do. I had one of the managers come up and said, "Do you need a mask?" And I looked her square in the eye and said, "I don't need one." She stepped back, she said, "Why?" I said, "I have a dispensation because of the air I take in through my nose. No germs can get in. This is my mask." I knew I was going to get questioned, but I had planned this out. Anyhow, she gave me this queer look and she said, "Really?" And I said, "Yes, ma'am." She says, "Okay." I just went on my way. And I got the big, I tried to keep from laughing. And I did. I didn't laugh. I pulled it off.
I want to know who's making money from all these masks.
The Chinese.
Well, I gotta tell you what, American ingenuity, there's been a lot of people that jumped and said, "Hey, supply and demand, everybody's demanding it, I'll supply it," and they're making money, and that's fine.
A lot of money.
They're making a lot of money. That guy that sells pillows on television, he switched one of his whole factories over to making masks, so he's making a ton of money. And I applaud him, good for him. But, because that's American ingenuity. It's not the government told him he had to make masks, he went out and did it. So, fine. If all the people are so stupid they need to buy 20 masks, you know. Oh, well.
Some of you may have heard about the comment already that this kind of ties in with a combination of COVID and the election and voting. Biden went and voted in Delaware, and Trump made a comment along the lines of, if Biden in his condition could go out and physically go and vote, there's no reason anybody can't do it.
You know, my theory is China, who has a 100-year plan to kick our ass. Look at the wrath of destruction in this country, and they've never fired one shot.
Yeah.
And I mean, they have hit us in every single layer of our economy and our psyche, and every situation has been impacted by this, and they've not had one round fired towards us, so we can't say they declared war.
Okay. Well,
Anything else?
yeah,
We're done.
I think we're gonna wrap it up there.
Very good.
Our next, thank you very much. Okay, our next meeting will be October the 20th, and John Reagan really apologized for not being able to be at this meeting. He had a special meeting in Nashville today, and was not going to be able to be back for it. He will be here next meeting, and we might try and get the Lieutenant Governor here also for the next meeting. We're going to ask if he can come. Randy McNally, and we'll see whether we can do that. So I want to thank you for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the meeting. It was kind of fun to talk about some of these things.